Last Christmas, I sat at a dining table set for 8 people and ate alone. My name is Charles Reed. I'm 78 years old, and I am, by every measurable standard that this world cares about, a success. I have a house with 6 bedrooms. I have a pension that most people would retire twice on. I have awards on a wall in a study that nobody enters anymore. And I want to tell you something that took me nearly 8 decades to understand. I am also one of the loneliest human beings alive. Before I go on, I need you to know this is a real story, sent to this channel and represented through artificial intelligence. If you appreciate hearing real stories from real lives, drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I need to tell you what I did wrong before I run out of time to tell anyone. The doctors aren't giving me a deadline, not yet. But when you're 78 and you sit at a dining table that seats 8 people, and the only sound in the house is the ticking of a grandfather clock your wife picked out in 1987, you start doing the math yourself. And the math is not good. I have been many things in my life: a son, a husband, a father, an executive, a winner. But I was only really good at one of those things. And it wasn't the ones that mattered. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My father worked at a factory that smelled like metal shavings and machine oil. He came home every night with grease under his fingernails that never fully washed out, no matter how hard he scrubbed. He was a quiet man, not cold, just quiet. And I watched him be quiet for 18 years, and I told myself I was going to be different. I was going to be loud. I was going to be somebody. I was 22 years old in 1968 when I got my first real job at a financial firm in Chicago. I remember the smell of that office. Carpet cleaner and cigarette smoke and something else. Something that I can only describe now as ambition. Everybody in that building wanted something. And I wanted it more than all of them combined. I worked 60 hours a week from day one. Not because I had to, because I genuinely believed that work was the answer to every question life was asking. I believed that if I just produced enough, achieved enough, earned enough, then eventually I would feel enough. That was the lie I swallowed whole. That was the poison I mistook for medicine. In 1971, I met Margaret. She was 26, and she laughed at something I said at a party, and the sound of it stopped me completely. I hadn't heard a laugh like that in years, maybe ever. We got married in the spring of 1973, and I remember standing at the altar thinking that I had found the missing piece. And for about 3 months, I was right. Then the promotion came, and then the next one, and then the one after that. By 1979, I was a regional director. By 1984, I was a vice president. The titles kept coming, and I kept chasing them the way a dog chases a car. No real plan for what happens when you catch it. We had 2 children by then. Daniel was born in 1975. Claire was born in 1978. I remember both births the way I remember most things from that period, in fragments between work calls. I missed Daniel's first steps. I was in Cincinnati at a conference. Margaret told me on the phone, and I said, "That's great, honey," and then went back to my dinner with a client. I actually went back to my dinner. I have thought about that moment probably 10,000 times since then. That's not an exaggeration. 10,000 times I have replayed that phone call and wished I had just said, "I'm coming home." I didn't come home. I ordered the steak. The house we bought in 1981 was beautiful. 4 bedrooms, a yard, a kitchen that Margaret filled with the smell of real food, roasted chicken, fresh bread, the kind of cooking that takes time and love. She cooked those meals, and I came home at 8, 9, sometimes 10 at night and ate them alone at the counter because I didn't want to wake the kids. I told myself that was sacrifice. I told myself I was doing it for them. That was another lie. I was doing it for me, for the title, for the number on my paycheck, for the look on my father's face when I told him what I earned, a look that I misread as pride but was probably just exhaustion. I was not cruel to Margaret. I want to be clear about that because it would be easier if I had been easier to explain, easier to place blame. I was not cruel. I was absent. And in a marriage, absence is its own kind of cruelty. It's slower. It doesn't leave marks you can point to. It just quietly drains the warmth out of everything until one day you realize you're living with a stranger who knows exactly how you take your coffee. We stopped talking about real things somewhere around 1983. We talked about logistics, the kids' schedules, the mortgage, the car that needed new tires. We were roommates with a shared history, and I told myself that was normal. That was what long marriages looked like. That's what my parents had, wasn't it? Yes. And look how that turned out. By 1990, I was earning more money than I had ever imagined. We had upgraded to the bigger house. Daniel was 15 and already angry at me in that quiet, steady way that teenagers have when they've given up on getting your attention. Claire was 12 and she would still hug me when I came home, but even then I could feel something pulling back in her, something protecting itself. I noticed it. I noticed and I filed it away under, I'll deal with that later. Later was always the plan. I'll be present later when things calm down at work. I'll take that vacation later when this quarter ends. I'll tell Margaret I love her in a way that means something later, when I'm not so tired. Later never came. Later is not a real place. I know that now. It was a Tuesday in March of 1994. I know the exact date, and March 8th, because it was the day before a board meeting I had been preparing for 6 weeks. I was in my study at 11 o'clock at night, going over presentation notes, when Margaret opened the door. She didn't come in, she just stood in the doorway in her robe, and she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, "I don't think you see us anymore, Charles. I'm not sure you ever did." I told her I was busy. I actually said those words. I told her I was busy and I'd talk to her tomorrow. She nodded. She closed the door, and that was the beginning of the end, though it took me 4 more years to recognize it. Margaret asked for a divorce in the spring of 1998. I was 52 years old, sitting across from a lawyer I'd never met, listening to a document that felt like a post-mortem on something I hadn't even realized was dying. 25 years. I sat there and I thought about all the evenings I had chosen the office over that woman, all the mornings I had left before she woke up, all the times Daniel or Claire had come to me with something, a drawing, a question, a bad grade, a broken heart, and I had given them 10% of my attention while keeping 90% somewhere else. The divorce was clean, which is the saddest thing I can say about it. There was no screaming, no throwing things, just paperwork and silence and the quiet rearrangement of a life. Margaret moved to Portland to be near her sister. Daniel was 23 by then and barely spoke to me. Claire called on holidays, but even those calls had the feeling of something performed, something maintained out of obligation rather than warmth. I sat in that big house alone for the first time in my adult life. 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen that smelled like nothing because I ate microwave meals and takeout containers. And you know what I did? I worked harder. Because that's the only language I knew. That's the only answer I had to a question I couldn't even bring myself to fully ask yet. I made Vice President Senior in 2001. I remember standing in my office after the announcement, looking out over Chicago, and waiting to feel something, just waiting. And the feeling that came was not pride or satisfaction or happiness. It was this quiet, creeping dread, like standing at the summit of a mountain you spent your whole life climbing and realizing the view is just more mountain. The real turning point came in November of 2019. I was 73 years old. I had been retired for 4 years. I had the house, the pension, more time than I had since I was a child, and absolutely nowhere to put it. Claire called me on a Sunday. This was unusual. Our calls were typically Saturday mornings, brief, polite. When I saw her name on a Sunday, I felt something cold in my chest. She told me she was fine, she was okay. She wasn't calling with bad news exactly. But she had something she needed to say. She said she had been in therapy for 2 years and her therapist had encouraged her to have this conversation. And she had been putting it off, but she didn't want to put it off anymore. She said, "Dad, I want you to know that I love you. But growing up, I felt invisible to you. Not once in a while. Always. And I've spent most of my adult life trying to figure out what was wrong with me that made it so hard for you to see me." I didn't say anything for a moment. And then I said the most honest thing I had said in years. I said, "Nothing was wrong with you, Claire. Nothing was ever wrong with you." And then I cried. Not politely, not quietly. I completely fell apart on a phone call with my daughter for the first time in my entire life. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm ashamed it took 73 years. We talked for 2 hours that day. 2 hours, which was more real conversation than we'd had in the combined sum of the previous decade. And somewhere in the middle of it, I understood, with the specific clarity of someone who has waited too long to see something obvious. That I had not sacrificed myself for my family. I had sacrificed my family for myself, for my ambition, for a version of myself that looked impressive from a distance. The armor I had worn my whole life, the self-sufficiency, the emotional control, the belief that needing people was weakness. It wasn't strength, it was fear. I was terrified, terrified of being ordinary, terrified of turning into my father coming home with grease under his fingernails. And in running from that fear, I had become something worse. I had become a ghost in my own life, present in body, absent in everything that counted. I want to tell you what I know now, not as a guru, not as someone who figured it out, as someone who mostly got it wrong and is trying to be useful with whatever time is left. The first thing is this. The life you're building right now is made of time, not money. I know that sounds simple. I know you've heard it, but you haven't felt it yet, and feeling it is different. Every hour I spent in that office in 1983 was an hour that does not exist anywhere anymore. Daniel at 8 years old, doing whatever 8-year-old boys do, growing up without his father really watching, that's gone. That is permanently, irrevocably gone. No promotion undoes it. No retirement account compensates for it. The compound interest on lost time never pays out. The second thing, the people in your life who love you are not going to wait forever. I know you know this abstractly. I'm telling you, they genuinely will not wait. Margaret waited 25 years, and then she stopped waiting. She didn't leave angry. She left tired. There is nothing more devastating than being left by someone who isn't angry anymore, because it means the hope is completely gone. Don't let the hope go completely. It is so much harder to recover from someone's exhaustion than from their anger. The third thing is about what you eat and how you sleep and whether you move your body. And before you skip over this, because it sounds like a wellness lecture, stay with me for a second. I spent 30 years eating sandwiches at my desk at noon and calling it efficiency. I slept 5 hours a night and called it discipline. By 65, I had high blood pressure, joint problems, and a body that felt like a car that had been running on the wrong fuel for decades. The machine you live in is not separate from the life you're trying to build. It is the life. Take care of it like it matters, because it is, in fact, the only one you get. The fourth thing, and this is the one that still costs me the most to say out loud, is that being right is not worth what it costs. I was right about a lot of things in my professional life, strategies, investments, personnel decisions. I have a track record that I can still recite without looking at notes. And I was also a man who would rather win an argument with his wife at 11 o'clock at night than admit he was scared and lonely and needed her to just sit with him for a while. I was right about so many things. And I lost the marriage, the childhood years of my kids, and 20 years of potential friendship with a woman who was genuinely one of the best people I have ever known. Being right is a cold house. I live in it. I can confirm this firsthand. The last thing, and I'm asking you to really hear this one, is that the version of you that finally has time for people, finally has time for your own life, finally slows down enough to actually taste the dinner in front of you instead of eating it over a keyboard. And that version only exists if you choose it now, not when you make senior partner, not when the kids are older, not when the mortgage is paid. Because the truth about later is that later you will be exactly as busy, exactly as distracted, exactly as convinced that just one more year of pushing will finally get you to the place where you can rest. I believed that for 40 years. The place does not exist. The rest has to happen now inside the life you currently have, or it doesn't happen at all. Right now in this moment, there is someone near you who would say yes if you asked them to just sit with you for a while. Not to talk about anything important, not to solve anything, just to be in the same room, drinking coffee, being alive together. That is the whole thing. That is what I missed. That is the treasure I walked past every single day for 40 years on my way to a desk. Call them tonight, not tomorrow, tonight. This channel shares real stories like mine every single day, stories sent in by real people, brought to life through artificial intelligence, because some truths need to be heard before someone else makes the same mistakes. If you have a story of your own, something you've lived through, something you're still carrying, you can send it through the link pinned in the first comment. Your voice matters. Your experience might be the thing that changes someone's direction. If this story made you feel something, if something in here hit close to home, leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Not for me. For the next person who needs to hear this before it's too late.